Hey, everybody. My guest today is Professor Karl Widerquist, and we're going to talk about universal basic income. All right, Professor, why don't you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Karl Widerquist. I'm originally from Cassopolis, Michigan. I have a PhD in economics and one in political theory. I'm currently working as a philosopher at Georgetown University's campus in Qatar in the Middle East. But I'm on sabbatical right now at our home, my wife and my home in New Orleans.
Okay, so as a first question, I think that we should probably define what universal basic income is. So how would you define it?
Well, in my latest book, which is Universal Basic Income on MIT Press's Essential Knowledge series, which was just officially released yesterday, officially went on sale yesterday. I use the definition of basic income from the Basic Income Earth Network, the largest and oldest international organization promoting basic income. And they define it as a periodic cash payment unconditionally delivered to all on an individual basis without means test or work requirement. Now, that means that it's in cash. Everybody gets it, rich or poor, but it's not like we're enriching the rich. We're gonna raise the taxes on the rich in order to make this feasible. So the rich, although the rich are getting this, they'll be paying taxes at the same time that are larger than this, much the way rich people currently collect Social Security while also paying taxes that are way more than Social Security. It's unconditionally delivered to all without means test or work requirement. And that means that we don't ask, are you sick? Are you disabled? Are you able to work? Are you willing to work? Are you unwilling to work? We don't ask any of those questions. Everybody gets it. Everybody gets it. And then also it's on an individual basis. So a wife and a husband would both get it. And if there's anyone else in the home that is old enough to make their own decisions, such as an adult child or something like that, they would get their own check. This is very important for families that aren't as happy as we all hope that all families are. Sometimes you get one spouse that abuses the other spouse, and in that case, it's very important to have an individual payment. So that's how we define basic income. Now, a lot of people, including somebody that I quote in my book, the philosopher Bertrand Russell from over 100 years ago, added one more thing to the definition, which is that it should be enough to live on. I think a good basic income is enough to live on, but the fact that that's the basic income I want, that's what I aspire to, but a lower basic income is also a basic income. In the same way, if Social Security wasn't enough to live on, it would still be a pension. It wouldn't be a good pension. I not only want a good pension, I want a good pension. And I don't want a basic income. I want a good basic income, and that's large enough to live on.
Okay, all right. So that sounds like a pretty drastic shift in our economic system, because as far as, I don't really understand our economic system and how it works, but it seems to me that right now, only the people who need particular services are offered services, and even some of them don't have access to it, right? So what you were advocating for is a shift from services to money, like cash payments, and it's to everybody.
Well, I'm not so much about switching services to basic income. I am not advocating, say, getting rid of Medicare and Medicaid to replace them with a basic income, and then you have to buy your own health insurance. I think that's going the wrong direction. We need, I don't want to talk about healthcare. My personal opinion is we should have something more like Canada has that really works. So it really works in half the price of what we have. But I'm not here to talk about healthcare. It is, and some services, some things could be canceled. If you've got a basic income that's large enough to live on, you don't need food stamps. You probably don't need unemployment insurance, at least unless your unemployment insurance is higher than the basic income, then you'd only need the difference. Same with Social Security. If you got a basic income that's $15,000 a year, maybe that could replace your first $15,000 of Social Security. And it wouldn't replace the public school system, but it could replace things like TANF, which is different in every state, and some of those TANF funds are directed to helping low-income people, and some of them aren't. But it could replace things like that. Other things it obviously can't.
Interesting. Okay, so what are the arguments in favor of something like that?
Well, First of all, you mentioned as part of your earlier, I'll go back to your earlier question, because you said it's a big change. I want to talk a little bit more about it being a big change, because it is, in some sense, it's a big change because we never done anything like this before. But in other sense, it's a really small change. I describe basic income like this all the time, which is something that I got from a late basic income supporter named Leonard Green. His 10-year-old son, when he was describing it to him back in the 1980s or 90s, said, oh, so what you're saying is income doesn't have to start at zero. So what I say in response, he should say, that's it exactly. If we make no other reforms, all we're doing with basic income is having a market economy where income doesn't start at zero. Now, if you're eligible for old age pension, or if you're eligible for TANF relief, or you're eligible for disability, or if you're eligible for unemployment insurance, we have these various things where for you, it will not start at zero already. But we have a lot of people who aren't eligible for those things, and income starts at zero. And when income starts at zero, that causes huge problems for a lot of people. One is all of those people living in tents or sleeping under bridges and eating out of dumpsters. That's the homelessness problem is enormous in America. And we wouldn't need homelessness if income started at enough where people could rent a home and get food. But also other people face this, people who are just getting out of college, often are vastly become underemployed because they've got to take any job in the world to survive. Women, there are women in the world today who are afraid to leave their husbands because they have no other way to support themselves. The husband makes all the money. And they might be being abused. Maybe the children are being abused. Maybe they're being just emotionally mistreated. And they cannot leave their husband because of this. They're trapped with an abusive person. But also, it is good for every single worker, even way up in the middle class, people working $50,000, $75,000, $100,000 a year because they need their job. They're not taking their job because they want it. They're taking their job because they're needed. But if they had a basic income, they only take the jobs that they want. And that puts pressure on employers to give them better wages, better working conditions, better advancement potential, more respect on the job. It is very good. Basic income is very good for giving employers incentives to treat every one of us, every person who works for a living, like a decent person and not just like a tool that can be discarded when they're no longer needed.
Okay, so it is a way to enhance people's well-being and freedom. That's basically what it sounds like to me.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. You are not free if the rest of the world takes all the resources and say only privileged people own the resources of the earth and all the stuff we've made out of the resources of the earth, and you can't provide for yourself unless you go and take a subordinate position for those better off people. So it is a freer market than the market economy without a basic income. And you can still have buying and selling and trading and people getting fabulously rich. Fabulous rich people are going to have to pay their taxes. But basic income is only basic. You got a lot of room to give people an incentive to work if you're a good employer. If somebody's making a $15,000 or $20,000 a year basic income, you offer them a $100,000 a year job, that's a darn good incentive to get that person to work. Pay good wages if you want people to work, and you can have a great market economy that's so much more humane than the economy we have now.
So one of the things that just came to mind was those COVID checks that the government paid out to everybody.
Yeah.
Would that be a very, minor example of a basic income? It's just you would want something like that monthly?
Yes. The COVID checks were similar to a basic income on a temporary basis. They weren't exactly like a basic income. And the way that they were different from a basic income, but being a temporary basic income, made them a lot worse. They were based on what you'd paid in taxes the year before COVID, which meant that the people who needed the money most, the very poorest people who had no income last year or had very low income last year, did not get those COVID payments. The very people who needed most. And those people were still out there hustling, trying to get jobs, even when they were sneezing and so forth, and something like that. Basic income, and some other countries did something much more like basic income than the United States did, and got better results than your least advantaged workers, who are often your most essential workers. A lot of your essential workers are paid minimum wage, even though what they do is really, we can't do without it. Somebody who works at a store, somebody who delivers food, somebody who is a janitor at a place that makes food, or at a doctor's office or something like that. These essential workers make very low wages. And when you have a basic income, it cushions the people who are leaving the labor market because of something like COVID, but it also ends up being a net supplement to people who are working, at least people who are at the low end of who are working. So it gives people a very good, even at the very low end, if you're making that $15,000 a year basic income, even if you get a $30,000 a year job, the taxes on that $30,000 might be $10,000. You're still going to get your basic income. You're going to end up with $35,000, $40,000 a year. So you're going to be much better off. It gives you a very good incentive and gives a reward to those essential workers. So we've had good experience with doing something like basic income with these COVID payments, with previous recession payments, which we got in 2009 and in 2002 during an earlier recession, and with Social Security, which is a little bit like a basic income for elderly people. Not exactly, but a little bit. You get it whether or not you're working. You get it whether or not you're rich. You get whether or not you've saved loads and loads of money for retirement.
Okay. So is part of your definition of universal basic income that everybody gets the same amount each month?
Well, strictly speaking, that's not in the definition. And usually it's thought of that children get less, all working age adults get the same amount. And then if you merge it with Social Security or something, or whatever pension system you have in your country, then elderly people would get more. But otherwise, you would think that it would be the same for everybody. However, it doesn't have to be that way. You could integrate it with disability payments. So, and you could integrate it with other kinds of supplements for people in need. So one for people who are a higher rate for people who are disabled, and a higher rate for people who are disabled, maybe a higher rate for people who are blind, who are not necessarily unable to work, but you've got extra expenses because you're blind. A higher rate, one rate for blind people, another rate for deaf people, another rate for paraplegics or somebody with certain diseases or something, certain chronic diseases, something like that. So you could imagine different rates for people with different levels of need. However, it might be better to just have one basic income for everybody, maybe lower for children, but one basic income for all adults, and then everything else is a separate program that adds on to basic income, but through a separate program. How best to do it is an administrative question, but there can be higher payments for people with demonstrated higher need.
Okay, so
but also one thing I should say: not all of those extra payments should be necessarily are best in cash. I remember seeing a woman academic speak at an academic conference in Britain, and she shows up in a wheelchair. She goes to give her talks, and she's talking about support for people who need it. She shows up in her wheelchair, and she mentioned that in Britain, she does not think about how much her wheelchair costs. She is not even told how much. She's encouraged not to think of how much her wheelchair costs. If you need a wheelchair, the government will get you a good wheelchair. And if the wheelchair is not good, you could complain. And for some things, maybe we want to do that. Maybe we want to do it for things. In the United States, we almost want everybody to think about how much does it cost for what you're getting. But maybe for something like wheelchair, for the small number of people, the small percentage of the population who can really benefit from a wheelchair, and it would really get them out of the house, back into the labor force and stuff like that, maybe we should be telling, forget about that. We'll give you this in kind. If you're blind, if a leader dog works for you, if a service dog works for you, we'll give you that in kind. You don't have to buy it. So some things, not every benefit is best in cash.
Thank you for that clarification. Yeah. So it seems to me that rich people are going to have to pay more in taxes in order to fund something like a universal basic income. But then you also said that the payout is unconditional, like everybody gets some, right? So the rich are going to pay more in taxes to fund it for everybody else, but they also receive a universal basic income. So how does that work out for the rich then? Like overall, they would still be losing money, correct?
Well, when I've done calculations of the net cost of a basic income at roughly the poverty line, depending on what tax rate you use, you get something 50% at some of the less generous versions. 50%, just over 50% of people are net beneficiaries. That what they get in basic income is more than what they're going to pay in taxes to support it. Whereas with a more generous one, it gets to more like 70% of people. So that means if you're in that range of 60 to 80%, you're going to be very close. You're not going to be much better off, much worse off one way or another. So that means the people that are significantly worse off are going to be 70%, maybe 75%, maybe 80%. So you're looking at the top 20, 30% of people who are even net payers or net contributors. And the higher you go, if we've got a good system, the higher you go, the more you're going to be a net contributor. Somebody who owns vast amounts of real estate, somebody that owns huge amounts of stock in companies, these kind of people. But those people, they can afford it. We have redirected our tax and benefits system. Since the 1970s, it was getting, from the 30s to the 70s, it was getting more progressive, more help for those who need it, higher taxes for other people, for those who have the most. And we've reversed that. And what we found is that supposedly they told us, oh, if you stop giving it to those loafers at the low end, that's going to be good for the middle class. And it was a lie. It was simply not true. The better off you make the bottom, the better off the middle class will be, because the middle class alternative to whatever wages they get is to be in the lower class. So you're taking away the middle class's leverage and lowering the taxes on the upper class. That's what we've been doing since the 1970s. And it's had the predictable results that even though our economy has doubled in size since about 1980 at this point, it's doubled in size, but yet most of us, the vast majority of people, are no better off financially than our ancestors were 50 years ago. People who were our age at the time. Age still goes up with income, but if the whole thing is lower, you're worse off than somebody like you was once they reach your age. So what's happened in that time is that doubling of the economy, almost all of that went to the top 1 or 2%. So their income and wealth has way more than doubled, tripled, gone up by 10 times. I don't know the exact stats on that, but it's gone up very, very a lot. You take half of economic growth and you take the economy's doubled in size, and the only people who benefited that are the top 1 or 2%. The rest of us has gained 5, 10% maybe, or maybe nothing. If most of that gain is going to those people at the top, they can afford to pay quite a bit more in taxes and still be way better off than wealthy people were in the 1970s. And wealthy people were still investing in corporations in the 1970s. They still owned yachts. They still owned all the fancy stuff they had. They still had multiple houses. We can get the incentive we need to get wealthy people to do the stuff we want them to do and have them pay much higher taxes.
So I don't really have a background in economics, so I have big questions, okay? And one of them is regarding this, assumption that rich people create jobs. And so if you lower taxes on the rich, they're going to create more jobs. Is that true or false?
I mean, we tried that. We've been trying that since the 1970s, and it hasn't been working. And it sounds, I mean, that's the label for that, trickle-down economics, is what it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a very good name for it. We justify giving a bunch of money to rich people, and supposedly that's going to trickle down to benefits for everybody. Well, if you really wanted to benefit everybody, you'd just give the benefits directly to everybody to begin with. You wouldn't count on it trickling down. But not everything that rich people do with their money is something that we want to incentivize them to do. You say, oh, well, if you leave it to the market, that's going to give everybody good incentives. No, actually, the market doesn't always have good incentives. The market has no incentive to end homelessness because the market provides goods for people who can pay for them. If you have homeless people, they can't buy, they have no demand for anything. There's really no incentive to do anything to help them, except for offer them a really low-wage job. And then you offer them a low-wage job and you end up exploiting them. And we've gotten a lot worse jobs than we had in the 70s. Used to be being a meat packer was a great union job. Now being a meat packer is a minimum wage or less than minimum wage when they use undocumented aliens for it, because they've busted unions and they've got people and they hire people who have no other reasonable choice. That's how you get better jobs, is give people a better choice. What's happening with rich people, what they're doing with money, a lot of what they do with their money is, how can I figure out how to get away with paying my employees less, giving them lower benefits, giving them less advancement potential. They're thinking about these things all the time. How can I eliminate jobs? Then often what they do is they invest money. In the 70s, maybe a wealthy person had 2 or 3 houses. Maybe they're going to have 10 or 15 houses. Now, there was a presidential candidate, John McCain, who was so wealthy. When they asked him how many houses he owned, he couldn't say. He'd forgotten how many houses he owned because he was that wealthy. When wealthy people are buying up houses, and also real estate just to let it sit there and speculate. Maybe this real estate is going to be more valuable in the future if I just buy it and let it sit there. So it's not just their homes. When they do this, they are driving up the cost of housing for everyone. So that trickles down in a negative way. The trickle down for giving a lot of people, rich people, money, which they then invest in real estate, just drives up the price of real estate so that no one but rich people can afford it. You give rich people a lot more money, very often they will fly to their tennis lesson in another state in their jet or their helicopter, polluting our atmosphere and making us all sicker. Not everything rich people do with their money is something we want to incentivize them to do. They also use a lot of that money to buy politicians to get more favorable legislation for rich people. No, we really need to tax the rich to get rid of a lot of the rich people's wasteful spending, the kind of spending that makes the rest of us worse off.
I kind of want to shift gears and kind of ask some philosophical questions. So my assumption is that one of the strongest criticisms of something like a universal basic income is perhaps may come from like a libertarian, right? Or people who are focused on people's rights and your property being a part of your rights, right? And the money that you make also being something that rightfully belongs to you. And so the more that the government takes away and redistributes that money, the more the government kind of owns your labor time. And it's kind of like, like that Nozikian claim that it's akin to slavery. Like, well, what do you think about that?
No, I think that those kind of arguments are made by selectively ignoring really important facts about the world. These people who talk about these property rights theorists who try to call themselves libertarians, which is such an incredibly wrong name because it really has absolutely nothing to do with liberty or freedom. Because the way you get a property rights system, the kind of property rights system we have, is that governments aggressively, violently establish control of the land and all of the resources of land, almost always taking it away from original appropriators like native peoples who have tended to share that land in a way so that if no one in the village is starving unless everyone in the village is starving is what is the way in most traditional societies before the enclosure movement in Europe and the colonial movement in the rest of the world violently forced people to change and establish this private property rights system. And they established it for one reason, to benefit people who were already privileged, to benefit the wealthy, connected people. They violently established this thing, and then they say, we rule the earth. The libertarians are saying, these so-called libertarians are saying, we, the wealthy people, own the earth, and the rest of you can just go starve or work for us. That's not freedom. That is violence. That is aggression. That is not, and that explains why basic income is the farthest thing in the world for something for nothing. It's absolutely not something for nothing. Something for nothing is when the government takes all the land from the native peoples, violently controls it, gives it to wealthy people, and then only other people can buy in so much as they work for the wealthy landowners or the wealthy resource owners or corporate owners. All of those things are made, if you trace back, they're made out of resources. That is something for nothing. The government has given you the privilege of being a wealthy person in a private system. What is to reverse something for nothing is that people who own the resources of the world and the things that we make out of them pay for them. That means an unconditional payment from the property owners of the world to the otherwise propertyless of the world. That is something for something. That begins to establish a free society. When you said, okay, we've taken away your freedom to work with the land directly, we're paying you for what we took by giving you a basic income paid for by the property owners of the world. That is a system that is far more consistent with liberty than what these so-called libertarians put forward.
Okay, so you mentioned a lot there, and I want to unpack that. So one point that you made was an historical one, right? Yeah. So if you look at the history of, I guess, private property, it's just a history rife with like exploitation, perhaps even theft, right? And so there's an unjust acquisition of these resources to begin with, right? And so perhaps your proposal then is like, well, we have to acknowledge and have to address this historical injustice if we're actually going to take liberty seriously. Okay, that sounds like one thing that you were saying, and another thing that you were saying sounds like.
Okay. Well, let me just start with there.
Yeah.
With historical injustice. When people say historical injustice, they often make it. That often can be used to be dismissive. Oh, that's just something that happened a long time ago. That was a historical injustice. Well, all those people are dead. Well, yeah, those people are dead, but the effects of what they're doing, the inequality they created, the privilege that they created is still here. So even though there was this historical series of events that led us to this point, I'm talking about present injustice. Present injustice, the fact that some people own huge amounts of the earth and most of us own nothing. Even a lot of us think we own our houses when the bank really owns our houses. By the time we pay off the bank, we're too old to work anyway. So really, most of us, the 99%, through most of our working lives, are in a position where we have to work for someone who has more privileges than we do. That is a present injustice when some people control the earth and other people don't. And those people who want to control more of the earth have never asked the people who have to make do with fewer resources because of that. People who pollute more do not pay to compensate people who pollute less. People who own more land do not pay people who own less land. That is a present injustice that we were brought to this present injustice by historical circumstances. But it's not like we had a historical bad thing happen and everything was free trade from that. No, it's not been free trade. It has been trade based on this property rights system that is inconsistent with equality before the law and with the freedom of all people.
Okay, so now I have another question about the historical injustice thing. Mm-hmm. So are you saying that this historical injustice, if you just trace the history to modern day, they're intricately connected? That if we hadn't had this historical injustice, we wouldn't necessarily have our present injustice. So like if you maybe genealogically you could trace it, right? Like the rich and privileged people back in that day passed down their privilege and wealth to their descendants, and then you can kind of trace it down. Is that the kind of argument that you're making?
Well, it's not just their descendants; it's whoever bought the property from. So let's say I'm the son of a billionaire, and you are the spouse of a billionaire, and we're both the same age. And you marry, or you're not even a spouse. Let's say you're the spouse. Okay, so obviously this billionaire is like 95 years old and really unattractive. And the only thing that will make you want to be their spouse is the thought that you can inherit this money from them. And so, in a sense, you're really working for your money because you're pretending to be, you're pretending to love this spouse, having sex with them, whatever. You're essentially a sex worker. I'm the son. You worked for your money. I didn't. I was just the son. But we each get $1 billion. Well, the fact that you worked for it doesn't give you any more claim to it than the fact that I was the billionaire's son. And if you don't like the sex work example, let's say you're not a sex worker. Let's say there's a third person. You're the sex. Sorry, I made you the sex worker in my example. But there's a third person. Is somebody who runs an air jet taxi service. So they jet rich people around the world. So this person has been selling, this rich person rides on their jet to Tahiti or Sydney, Australia, or Machu Picchu or whatever, and helicopter and jet rides, polluting the atmosphere, making us all worse off, but serving the whim of this wealthy person. They're working hard. That person is working really, really hard. But then the rich person dies. I got my billion, you got your billion, and this person has their billion for the money. They made their money helping this rich person pollute the atmosphere. You made your money by having sex with this rich person. And I made my money just by inheritance. You and the other person made it through the free market, and I just made it through inheritance. But we've all worked, you two have worked for your money, but you work for the wrong people. You work for a dead person who's not using those resources now anyway. That $1 billion buys a lot of land and a lot of the stuff we make out of land. The three of us are going to be polluting a lot more than everybody else. We're going to be using up resources, and we're going to use our leverage of controlling resources to benefit from the labor of everybody else. So it's about what is happening now. It is about we have ownership of lots of the earth that other people don't have, and we just took that. We didn't ask the people who have to breathe in the air for those jets, those jet rides. We didn't ask them, how much can I pay you to make it okay for me to have a jet and to use up this precious jet fuel? We didn't ask them, what can you, the landless, how much do I pay you so I can own these huge amounts of land and put up these wonderful mansions on them, or whatever else I feel like putting on my land? We've worked for the wrong people. We work for the previous generation of rich people. We don't work for each other. And to the extent that we do work for each other, I mean, most people get their basic needs met. To the extent we do work for each other, it's sort of ancillary. The more people serve wealthy people, the wealthier they get, and the more we all work for them. People who don't work for wealthy people become homeless, and we put in very little work for them.
Okay. All right. Like, again, your answer just like had a lot there, and you're just like driving me to ask more questions about it. So it sounds like what you're saying is that there is a fundamental unjustness to these economic transactions. And it's not like, so even if the historical part didn't exist, it would still exist today because there's just something fundamental about how our economy works that is unjust. Mm-hmm. So like you said, the people who fly in their private jets, they don't pay for the pollution or something like. They're not asking other people, how much can I pay you so that you're willing to breathe in like this slightly more polluted air mm-hmm. from my activities, right? So it's almost like they're externalizing some costs, right? So if it were the case, theoretically, that they were not externalizing costs, could there be just economic transactions that wouldn't lead to an unjust society?
Virtually all of our transactions, people like to think of our transactions as involving, I exchange my labor for your labor, and that's nobody else's business. But almost nothing that we make is made solely out of labor. So let's say I'm a comedian, you're a musician. I'm the world's greatest comedian, you're the world's greatest musician. We play for each other. I play a concert for you that's worth $1 million, and you play a concert for me that's worth $1 million, and I give a comedy show that's worth $1 million. We both are enriched by something that's worth $1 million, but we can't trade that for anything. We can't trade that for land. I just heard your concert, it's over. I don't get land for that. I cannot give you land because the land doesn't belong to anyone. I cannot give you a land unless the government finally takes control of that land and says, Karl, that's yours. Trade it as you want. Only then can we trade. Now, only then can we trade things like land. And pretty much everything that we make is made partly out of our natural resources. If you and I, me the comedian and you the musician, if we want to turn that into cash that we can buy stuff with, we've got to go in a concert hall. Or we've got to go on TV, use the broadcast system. We've got to do all sorts of things. And then we get all this money. And then what do we do with it? We buy a house. Well, the house is made out of land and natural resources. So we have taken control of these resources. We still have not said, I'm going to control this land. That means other people who don't have land have to make do with less when I don't, for me to have more. So we still have not paid the people willing. We've just paid descendants of descendants of descendants going back to, or buyers and buyers and buyers going back to when the government violently established this property rights system we have. But we don't to say that. So it is a pretty fundamental critique of the market economy as constituted, but it's not one that it's not one that you have to throw out the market economy to fix this problem. Like Marx, for example, talked a good game about what was wrong with capitalism. He recognized a lot of problems, that it was alienating, that workers were forced to work, and therefore they worked for very low wages. A lot of those problems I've been saying, Marx identified those problems. He didn't stress resources as much as I do, but that's another thing. But Marx's solution was, well, let's throw the whole capitalist system out, and then we'll have a dictatorship of the proletariat, and then everything's going to work out. Well, we tried that, and that doesn't necessarily work out either, because no matter who's in control, you get privileged people in control. So so what I'm saying is you can have a market economy, just make it so income doesn't start at zero. So those who have a lot, those who have a lot of the stuff that's made out of this earth that we live in, those who control, use up or pollute the earth of ours, pay back to those who don't, or those who have very little. You pay from those who control the resources to those who don't control resources, and then you can have a market economy, and it doesn't have the kind of problems. Then when I'm trading you, when I'm trading my comedy services for things I can buy land with, I'm going to pay that land tax as we go. I'm going to pay the pollution tax as we can go. I'm going to pay any tax that is based on the resources that I use up. And you as a musician doing the same thing.
Interesting. Okay. So I wonder how the framework of rights fits into your philosophy, right? It kind of sounds like that you think everybody has equal rights to natural resources. Is that what you believe?
Well, no, I don't think that's the way to put it. That makes it sound like we're all naturally part of this corporation that owns the earth. And that's the way, there are a lot of people that put it that way. And this is where I take part from someone like Henry George, who's very much stressed taxes on resources, and some of his contemporary followers like Hillel Steiner, very much stress we all own the resources. And that's what the so-called libertarians will say, well, who says you own all the resources? But of course, these people, the libertarians will say, oh, the original appropriator owned the resources. Well, actually, if the original appropriator owned the resources, we wouldn't have a market economy. We would have the kind of thing that Native Americans had before Europeans got to the United States. So the original appropriator theory doesn't give those libertarians what they want. But what I'm saying is that what I'm talking about is not so much a right to own resources, but look as who is interfering with who. If we have a hunter-gatherer economy and some people want to set up a farming economy and they say, no, you can't do that because we're hunter-gatherers. We're all sharing the earth. It's all a common space. You can't be a farmer. Then you're interfering with the person who wants to be a farmer. But if the farmer says, well, I'm not listening to you, I'm going to be a farmer, I'm blocking off this land, you can't hunt and gather here, they're interfering with the hunter-gatherers. And somebody who wants to go from farming to an industrial society is interfering with the farmers and the hunter-gatherers. So whatever we do, somebody is going to interfere with somebody else. So what I'm saying, the ones who are interfering with other people, the ones who are getting things the way they want it, have to pay for that privilege for the ones who aren't. The ones who control the most resources should pay those who control the least resources. Those who are polluting the most pay those who are polluting the least. And that gives you an unconditional basic income. The people don't have to work for this money because they're already owed compensation because people are interfering with them. So you're paying with interference with what people would do if other people would stay out of the way, not necessarily for a violation of a property right in one share of the world's land.
Interesting. So it's almost like a interference tax.
Yes.
And then rich people necessarily interfere with more people because they control more resources.
Yeah, you control resources that were here before any of us got here. And if we don't destroy them, they'll be here after we're all gone. And you're interfering with uses that other people could make of that.
Okay, I see. So I believe that there have been certain jurisdictions that have tried a basic income, right? And I don't know how successful they've been. I was wondering if you could, explain that to me.
Oh, yeah. Well, there are things that are like basic income, and it's often a question whether is this a true basic income. But the one, it's good that you asked this question right now because this leads right in from where we're talking about, is in Alaska. In Alaska, they discovered oil in the 1970s on state-owned land. And the state, usually what governments do when they discover wealthy, rich stuff on the land is they give it away to privileged people. And they did that with the Black Hills. Oh, the government didn't even own the land. The Black Hills were owned. The government had already bestowed ownership to the conglomeration of tribes we call the Sioux. They'd given them ownership of the Black Hills. Oh, there's gold in the Black Hills. The government will use its tax dollars to steal it from the Indians and then just give it to privileged white people. So white people get rich off it. The government just spends money, and all it does is enrich white people, hoping this is going to trickle down. Somehow this is going to benefit the Native Americans. Well, you go ask a Lakota or a Dakota Native American how much they benefited for that gold in the Black Hills. Go ask them, you see what you get. Now, but Alaska didn't do that. Alaska didn't give it away to rich people like we did with all of the oil land in Texas and all the oil land in Pennsylvania. They said, we're going to charge you for this, and we're going to use this money to support the state government, and we're going to use a tiny bit of it to put it into a fund. And from that fund, so the fund is in real estate, stocks, bonds all over the world. The fund is in financial investments all over. So it comes indirectly from the oil road. Oil revenue into the fund. Fund gets returns go to every single Alaska. Same amount for man, woman, and child. Elderly, young, rich, poor, everybody gets the same amount as long as they're a legal resident of Alaska. So non-citizens get it too. Legal resident of Alaska, and they fill out a form verifying. This is the one thing that makes it most different from basic income, is that they got to fill out a form to verify that they're residents of Alaska. And the form is actually really complicated and difficult, and there are people who don't get. Some of the neediest people are the people who have the most difficulty in filling out forms. So you go to a homeless shelter in Anchorage, as I've had, you speak to people about, they love the dividend, but they're like, yeah, I only get it about once every other year, once every 3 years, because I need somebody's help filling the form out, and they don't always get it. So they're losing. But now, so Alaska, hugely popular program. It's been called the third rail of Alaskan politics, although it has been attacked occasionally. Hugely popular program. It is small. It's usually between $1,000 and $3,000 a year per person. It varies quite a bit with the returns from the fund that it's in. It's small and it's variable. It's only once a year. So its smallness means that it doesn't do the kind of things Bertrand Russell and I want it to do. And it's variable. Usually we think of it, a regular cash income is going to be the same amount every year, maybe just going to go up steadily with economic growth or something. So in that sense, it's different from a basic income, but it is in the way that it's unconditional, non-means tested, goes to rich or poor alike, and it's like the kind of basic income I was just talking about, where the people who have the privilege of using that oil are paying the other people who say, well, I can't use this land and stuff because you've taken control of it. So it is the kind of payment that I'm very much talking about. However, it's way smaller than it should be. In Norway, the government gets 70% of Norway's oil revenues. In Alaska, the government only gets 30%. The rest goes to the companies. So Norway has driven a much harder bargain with the world's oil companies, but they still get somebody that's willing to drill that oil up for them for only 30% of total revenues. Alaska, they're giving them 70%. So it still is a bit of giveaway to corporations. So they got that 30% of gross oil revenues goes to the state government, but only a small share of that goes to this fund. The rest goes to other state programs. They got rid of their income tax, which was a regressive change. Had they put most of this into the fund and then maintain the state income tax, you would have a much larger fund today. And Alaska would be much more like the kind of economy that I'm talking about. But it is an important step towards that kind of economy. And, go to Alaska and ask Alaskans, is this a friendly place to do business? And they'll say yes. And do you like the permanent fund? And most of them will say yes. So you can have a market economy and have this kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm wondering if there have been experiments that kind of measure the well-being of the population before and after implementing some sort of basic income, right? Because there are certain empirical, perhaps, assumptions that we're making, proponents of universal basic income are making, right? And one of them being that this income will enhance people's well-being and enhance people's freedom. Perhaps theoretically it makes sense, but does it work in practice?
Oh, yeah. I cover that. I keep lifting up my book. Okay, $16.95, available on Amazon, not expensive. This is my first book I've ever written that is not expensive. I talk about that a lot in here. There's a whole chapter on the evidence of basic income's effects. And the effects have been, there's several different ways to look at the effects, but two of the main ones are actually experimenting with basic income. And the other one is to look at things that are existing programs that are kind of like basic income. And if you look at redistributional programs, you will find they work. If you look at the well-being of people who are not eligible for redistributional programs, who then become eligible, you find that they solve a lot of problems, that homelessness is really costly indirectly. And you can solve that with some very simple stuff that some countries are doing. Child poverty is not just a problem while children are children, but it will affect them for their entire life. And there's very good evidence from non-basic income policies that addressing poverty, making sure no one is ever at risk for poverty, makes us all better off. Now, then you could also look directly at experiments directly in basic income. And these have been going on, with things similar to basic income, like a guaranteed income. The first guaranteed income experiment started in 1968. So we're talking about 56 years ago. There were 5 really big ones in the U.S. and Canada between 68 and 1980. Then there was a big hiatus with no experience. And then gradually, beginning in the year 2000 in Namibia, then 2011 in India, They've been coming back. There have been more of them spread around the world. There's a huge one going on in Kenya right now, run by a nonprofit in the U.S. called Give Directly, but others around the world. And there are over 100. As a matter of fact, I recently heard 200 experiments in basic income, small ones, going on around the United States, over 100, perhaps close to 200 experiments going on around the United States right now. And what you find from these experiments overwhelmingly is they make the families who receive them better off. Child poverty goes down. Child nutrition goes up. Child education goes up. Educational performance goes up. Ambition to do better and to go farther in education, get a better job. All of these sorts of things go up. Even things like spousal abuse and mental illness go down when you have a better income, because these things, as horrible as horrible as it is, very often they are side effects from stress and poverty. Stress and poverty push people into mental illness and to the kind of fear that makes them violent. So we can help fight violence at the source by making sure that people live lives that are less stressed. Income doesn't have to start at zero. We don't have to put the entire 99% of the population under this constant fear that if I don't keep up doing what I'm doing, I'm going to be on the street living in a tent eating out of somebody else's garbage can. We don't need that kind of economy. And if we can free ourselves from this belief that we need that kind of inhumanity as the basic driver of our economy, we can have an economy that's better for everyone. We can have an economy where we're all less stressed and where our expenses are lower, where we don't have to deal with poverty and homelessness and stuff like that. And, simple reviews of the evidence are in. This is an introductory book, so it's going to give you a cursory review of the evidence, but it also gives you links to stuff. If you want to get deeper into the evidence, it gives you sources of where you can find that.
So what has been the most successful experiment? And then the second question is, have any of the experiments failed?
In science, there's virtually no such thing as a failed experiment unless you are unable to complete the experiment or you find out you did something wrong. Like you mixed up the results of the people who got this. Successful experiments are not like tests that you take in class where you get an A or a B or a C on it. That's not the way scientific experiments work. Like, we got a control group, we got an experimental group. The experimental group gets the treatment, the control group doesn't. You observe both of them, you find out in what ways they're different. A successful experiment is one where you could actually measure how this experiment affects people. And in some ways, they're all unsuccessful because we can't show all the effects, because all of the effects of getting a basic income are not just in what you do. If we give a basic income to 100 people in Dallas, Texas, and see what they do with it, you're going to get 10,000 people out of the 10 million person labor market in Dallas. You're going to get 100 or 1,000 people. That's not going to have a big effect on that. But if you give a basic income to everyone in the country, then that's going to affect the labor market. That's probably going to make wages and working conditions a lot better. If everybody has this power to say no to bad jobs, that's going to affect the entire labor market. What's that going to do to wages and working conditions? We don't know. Experiments can't measure that. And in that sense, all experiments fail. Another one is you can say, okay, we're giving 100 people in Dallas this basic income, and some of those are poor children. Do those poor children do better in school than the control group children? And you find that they do. But however, they're still going to a school where a lot of the other kids are hungry. How is their performance going to be affected when they go to a school where nobody's poor, nobody's hungry? How is that being affected? In that case, the experiments fail because they can't measure that. There's lots of things that experiments can't measure. In a sense, that all a failure. But if you're looking at how do they show the workability of basic income, is that they almost all show that recipients are much better off. I've never known. I don't think there's ever been one in all of these experiments, one showing people are not significantly better off in measurable ways than the control group. Now, and then people who oppose basic income have often cooked the books to say, oh, it's a failure. They'll make some sort of thing. They'll say, people didn't work as much if they got a basic income. Well, actually, if the basic income is low, people actually often work more with basic income when they have a basic income. But if the basic income is higher and it's given to people that are close to the poverty line, often they do work a little less. But, that's how you get better working conditions. You get better working conditions when people can refuse to take bad jobs. it is a good thing that people work less because that's how we get higher wages. That's how we get better working conditions. If you want a policy that's good for workers, you got to give the workers the power to say no to bad jobs. If you want one that's good for low-wage employers, then you want to put workers in a position where they can't say no to a bad job. Then wages stagnate, working conditions stagnate, cost of living increases stagnate, and that's bad. That's been what's been happening to the middle and lower classes since the 1970s. And basic income experiments, the ones that are give a more generous amount where people actually can refuse to work, are showing it's giving people this kind of leverage. It can't show what you get out of it because you need everybody in town doing it, not just 100 people out of the millions of people in Dallas. But that is how we give employers the incentive to pay good wages, is we give workers the possibility to say, I'm not going to take anything that doesn't pay good wages. And so to get that, some of the bad jobs need people to quit. And basic income experience is showing that. And these people that say, oh, they work less, that's not a bad thing. That's based on the assumption that the working class is working the right amount right now, even though some of them have 3 jobs and work 80 hours a week.
Yeah, I think the concerns that perhaps some conservatives have or some skeptics will have is that they don't like the idea of tax dollars going to a person who wants to surf all day, right? Like that person should have received so much money that they don't actually have to work. So it just seems like there's a fundamental value disagreement, right? There is this ideal that proponents of UBI are aiming for, and then some people just disagree with that ideal. They disagree with that utopian picture.
But it's not a fundamental ideal for the people who oppose basic income, because these people are leaving money to their children. So their children can surf all day off of Malibu and live in luxury, and have these lower class people who don't have basic income serving them all day as low-wage workers. There are very, very few rich people that leave their children destitute, that leave their children destitute when they turn 18. No, I'm not paying for college. No, I'm not going to talk to any of my friends to help you get a job. And no, I'm not going to give you 1 cent of my money. You might use that to surf all day off Malibu. So I'm not going to give you 1 cent of my money. All of that is going to my favorite charity. Maybe that's Harvard University or whatever it is rich people like to give to other than their children. There are almost no people that consistently stick to this idea. And if we believe this, if it was a fundamental value of the United States that there's a work ethic and that everyone must work for what they get, we would not allow the children of the wealthy to inherit any wealth. We would not allow them to get their cushy jobs that they get through their parents' connection. A world where everyone, as a responsibility of citizenship, has to work for a living is nothing like capitalism. You got to take capitalism and throw it in the toilet if you want a system where everybody works for what they get. Capital, the driving force of capital, is the return on capital investments. You don't have to do anything to get return on capital investments. You just need to own them. So if we wanted to go with that sort of work ethic utopia, we got to really get rid of rich people and their children. Find some way. How can we make a law to make sure that all rich people work?
Well, I think it's a good place to wrap things up. Thank you so much. It's a super fascinating topic. I've been wanting to learn about it for a number of years now.
All right. Well, thanks for asking me. It was perfect timing for me since my book came out yesterday. And so, thanks for asking me all these questions and being interested in this topic.